If you can hear me, this is Jerry Wasserman, and we're just letting everyone in at the moment. So we're going to take a minute and make sure everyone's in their seat. Right, here we go. Well, I'm Jerry Wasserman, and I want to welcome you all to the first presentation of our live, online, socially distanced UBC Senior Scholar Series for 2020. Let me first acknowledge that this event is taking place on the unceded ancestral territory of the Coast Salish peoples, particularly the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Now, the Senior Scholars Series, an initiative of the Association of Professors Emeriti, which is now the UBC Emeritus College, has been run in conjunction with Green College since 2011. I was lucky to have the opportunity to present in this series when it was in person, in the cozy confines of Green College Coach House. But as we know, things have changed. So I'm going to just quickly say welcome. And we're going to be online in this series for the next 6 presentations. They'll all be on Thursdays at 5 o'clock. After Tony tonight, we'll have Nancy Galini on October 15th and Kay Teschke on November 26th. And you can find details on the Green College and Emeritus College websites. Before I introduce Tony, let me give you some idea of our format. The plan is to have a 40-minute or 45-minute conversation between Tony and myself, followed by a Q&A. With the help of our crack technicians, Alan Gumbach and Tanya Astorino, we'll attempt to acknowledge anyone with a raised hand, and I'll explain how you can unmute your microphone so you can ask a brief question out loud rather than having to type it on the chat function. However, since the meeting is being recorded and some people may feel uncomfortable having their question to Tony recorded, try and keep it clean though, you can use the chat function, or if you have a question in the midst of the conversation and think you're going to forget it if you have to wait for 20 minutes to the end, put it on chat, and we'll have a look at chat at the end and see if we can respond to those questions as well. Again, technical glitches are more likely than not, so please be patient with us. Now, I'm delighted to introduce my longtime friend and colleague, Tony Dawson. Originally from Montreal, Tony arrived at the UBC English department in 1970 after receiving his PhD from Harvard. During his 40 years at UBC, Tony published 9 books and edited editions on Shakespeare, actually 8 on Shakespeare, 1 on Marlowe. He received both the Killam Teaching Prize and the Killam Research Prize, and he served as president of the Shakespeare Association of America. Tony's been fully engaged in theater and performance, acting in Freddie Wood productions. We, in fact, shared a stage in an early 1970s production of The Alchemist. He co-founded Touchstone Theater, and he's done dramaturgical work on Shakespeare productions for the Arts Club and Bard on the Beach. The title of Tony's talk today is Making Friends with Shakespeare. Hi, Tony.
Thank you, Jerry, for that. That was really lovely. It's hard to believe that all this time has gone by and all these things have happened. I mean, the things that I've done, I've been looking back at my CV and thinking, my God, did I actually do all that stuff? You know?
Yeah, it's not 1970 anymore either, is it?
No, it's not. But I remember those days when we shared the stage sometimes. And so once again, we're sharing the stage here.
We are sharing the virtual stage.
I think we'll start with the title.
All right, let's start with the title. I didn't realize you were old enough to know Shakespeare personally, so maybe you could explain how you made friends with Shakespeare.
Well, I'm old enough to know Shakespeare personally in the sense that personal is the way that you've got to get connected with Shakespeare if you want to enjoy it. But I chose this title because it touches on 3 different things. One is the fact that you have to sort of get by the potential intimidation that Shakespeare, the very name and the ubiquity of Shakespeare in the world. So you have to get by that to sort of cozy up and talk to him in a slightly more, as you said, personal way. So that's the first thing. It takes a little while to do that, and Jerry and I will be talking about some of those things as we go. The other things about friendship and Shakespeare that I want to at least allude to in the title is the fact that Shakespeare is very interested in friendship and writes in a lot of his plays. There are beautiful renditions of friendship, and so doing that strikes me as another important part of calling this thing making friends with Shakespeare. The third thing is the fact that I have made a lot of friends via Shakespeare, in the sense of my work at the Shakespeare Association and my work in general with in the field. I've made a lot of very, very close connections, and that's really one of the most important things that for me, of the whole business. I see some of those faces actually here on the screen in front of me. And I want to thank them and all my other dear friends in the Shakespeare Association and in the Shakespeare world who aren't here.
So
those
Tony,
are the three ways I'm sort of thinking about the title. Sorry, Jerry, go ahead.
Well, I'm sorry. It's your gig, and I keep interrupting. But I wanted to ask you, how and when did you actually get started with this friendship with Shakespeare?
Well, I think it takes me back to high school. And we studied various Shakespeare plays, but the one that sort of came home to me was Julius Caesar. And we had the teacher we had that year, I was in, I think, third year high school. The teacher we had that year made us memorize and give speeches to the assembled class. So I got this, I don't know whether I chose or it was chosen for me, but anyway, I ended up with the speech that Mark Antony makes after he stirs up the people in which he's memorializing Caesar. And the dead body of Caesar is there in front of him, and he looks down at it and he says, "Oh, pardon me, thou bleeding piece of earth, that I am meek and gentle with these butchers." And he went wild, you know. Now, I want to emphasize that I'm doing this in a coarse acting sort of way. This is not professional acting. But this is the way I did it in high school, really big. "Oh, Caesar, come hot from hell. Let's slip the dogs of war." These terrific cry havoc. All these bits in the speech in which I sort of threw my arms around as I'm doing now and generally had fun with it. The teacher was a little underwhelmed by all of this, probably because I was a little bit over the top. I have to, especially kneeling at the end and saying "cry havoc" with my hands up in the air. So that's how it began, Jerry. Sort of an interest in this guy Shakespeare and the way he wrote these things.
And you continued this friendship, this pursuit through college.
Yeah, and once again, Julius Caesar comes to the fore. We did a production of I took various courses that connected to Shakespeare, but the production that I want to mention now is this version of Julius Caesar again, that a friend of mine who later wrote for the National Lampoon, so that might give you a sense of where this was going. A friend of mine rewrote the script by having it start with the quarrel between Brutus and Cassius, which is actually in Act 4 of the text itself, and having Brutus fall asleep after that and dream the earlier parts of the play, which was set in Latin America. And I played the part of Caesar, and I was wearing one of those white sort of generalissimo kind of soldier military suits. And the people who were, the conspirators who were fighting against us were, of course, dressed in fatigues to look like Castro and his buddies. And I might add that this production featured an actor who played Brutus. The actor who played Brutus became one of the best known actors in Canada. A little bit after that, it was Richard Manette. And so we were lucky to have Richard Manette in that production. And it all went off quite well, actually, despite the absurdity of it. So that was another way I connected, you know.
Who wouldn't fall in love with Shakespeare with those kinds of experiences?
I should say that the guy who played Mark Antony, which was the part I wanted to play in this production in college, ended up being the president of Concordia University many years later. So I
Whoa.
guess I'm in a way glad that I didn't get the part of Antony if that was the trajectory.
Now, Tony, you went to Jesuit schools, didn't you?
That's right.
And so my question is whether your romance with Shakespeare, your interest in Shakespeare, and ultimately your approach to Shakespeare was in any way influenced by the Jesuit way of teaching.
Okay, well, that's a terrifically interesting question and has lots of ramifications. Let me try and spell a couple of them out. One is that the Jesuits as teachers and as people who are interested in language, the Jesuits are a very good fit with that because they emphasized languages, they emphasized rhetoric, they emphasized drama, and so I certainly picked up on all that. Not only learning Latin and Greek, but also doing a lot of drama. So in general, I would say that, first of all, the training that you get in a Jesuit school, or I got in that Jesuit school, is conducive very much to working in the kinds of fields that I went to work in. The other thing was this sort of love of performance that I had, which was certainly encouraged by the Jesuit priests who were around the place. So enough to make me sort of interested in following the Jesuit path a little bit further. So when I was in after first year university, I joined the Jesuit order and was a novice for a year in a novitiate in Ontario, in Guelph, Ontario.
Wow.
Which turned out to be not quite my my cup of tea, but nevertheless, it was an interesting experience.
A road not taken.
A road not taken, indeed. Yeah.
Okay, well, that's kind of part one of this saga. Part two, I understand, begins between university and graduate school, where you did some teaching.
Oh yeah, this is just a very funny little thing. Yeah, I got a job when I finished college. Like so many people with a BA, I didn't know what the heck I was going to do with myself, and I was thinking, well, I'll go to graduate school at some point. I'm interested in theater and drama and things like that, so I'll probably go in that field. But I'm also interested in finding out about the meaning of life and all that kind of stuff, which is one of the reasons why I went into the Jesuit order. And I toyed with the idea of taking philosophy as well. So I was, as an undergraduate, I did a sort of minor in philosophy as well as an honors degree in English. So I was thinking of going to graduate school, but I didn't know what I was going to do. And so I got a job at a little French private school in Montreal. And I was teaching English in this school. And I taught English from kids from about grade 2, which is impossible for me, up to approximately grade 11 or grade 12. And dealing with the older kids was easy, but dealing with the younger kids was not. But one time, this is just a sort of a sidebar, but one time I was teaching the kids elementary English. These kids these were like grade 3, and they know no English whatsoever. And I said, okay, today, kids, we're gonna try doing the verb to be. And immediately in the back of the class, 2 or 3 little voices went, to be or not to be, to be or not to be. I thought, so Shakespeare is everywhere, right? This is,
wide reach.
So that was I tried to teach the older kids a Shakespeare play when it was, once again, it was Julius Caesar, but it didn't go over quite as well as that.
So
then I went off to graduate school.
Yes, off to Harvard. Lucky you. And were you sure you were going to do like theater and performance?
Well, I knew I was interested in that, but I was also interested in a couple of other things. One was philosophy, but I wasn't going to be going that route, but I was still going to be interested in some of the issues that it raises in relation to literature. And I sort of lost where I was. What was the question again?
Oh, well, was it just theater and performance that you were
Oh,
focused on when you went to
well, yeah, I mean, but I was interested in Shakespeare as well as other writers and so on. There was one of my teachers. I was a TA for one of my teachers for 2 different years. His name was Dan Seltzer, and he's not a well-known scholar, well-known Shakespearean, but he was a terrific actor, a wonderful actor. And when he was teaching these classes, he would speak the parts in ways unlike my speaking of Antony's role back in high school. He would do them with subtlety and fullness, and you could switch from one character to the next, and this just amazed me. And I thought, well, this is something I would like to emulate. And to some degree, not to the same degree, I hope I did that in my classes when I eventually came to teach.
Isn't it fascinating the way you can sort of isolate signposts in your life, these sort of accidents where you bump up against a
That's right.
person or something, and it just takes you on a path that changes your whole life.
That's right. One of the things that just having the TA-ship, which wasn't something I chose, I think it was chosen for me, or at least I was suggested that I might try it. That was certainly one of those moments when led in that direction. Things began to converge as they do. I took another course from a guy called David Colstone, which introduced me to the sort of literary sides of Shakespeare. So I had the performance side and the literary side.
And what was your dissertation
My dissertation was on 5 Shakespeare comedies, and I'll talk about it in a second, but just to say that my thesis advisor was not Dan Seltzer, who by this time had gone to Princeton, but who remained as a sort of one of my mentors and who sat on my committee. But the thesis advisor was a man called G.B. Evans, Gwyn Blakemore Evans, who edited the Riverside Shakespeare, which is a lot of you probably have in your shelves. And he was a wonderful man. I would go up to into his room, and it was one of those classic scholarly rooms, with piles of papers in every which way and books sticking out here and there. And he's got this incredible set of index cards because he's at this point editing the whole of Shakespeare, one play at a time. And it was a treat to see him, but at the same time, I didn't want to emulate him in the sense that I didn't want to become a textual scholar. Little did I know that I would eventually go in that direction, but at this point, it wasn't what I was aiming at.
So how did you end up at
You
UBC?
asked me about my thesis.
Oh, sorry.
Do you want me to go on about the thesis?
Yes. Your thesis.
Okay, my thesis was on 5 Shakespeare comedies. It was called The Doubleness of Deceit, which is a kind of deceitful title. But I was interested in things like disguise and play acting and plays within plays and all these kinds of ways in which Shakespeare utilizes what you might call reflexive views of drama, or a certain kind of reflexivity built into the drama. So, for example, when you get Shakespeare, when Hamlet is presenting a play to the assembled, Hamlet arranges the presentation of the play. This, in some ways, models or connects to the play as a whole, and we see a sort of doubleness in this. I'm sorry, I'm not saying this very well. It's a long time ago.
Well, it's your dissertation.
Out of that came my first book.
Yeah.
It's called In Directions, which is quoting Polonius, which is who's probably not the best person to actually quote, because he's not the most honest person, but nevertheless. But in directions, we find directions out. So the argument of this kind of thing was that if you look carefully at the way in which Shakespeare sort of uses these self-reflexive kinds of techniques, you learn the ways in which the characters seek, sometimes gain, something like clarification, something like some kind of awareness, something that they're trying to achieve.
Truth through deceit.
Truth through deceit, yeah.
Oh,
And
nice.
this is, of course, what drama is. I mean, drama is fiction. This is, and the fact that fiction can be used for real purposes is itself an interesting phenomenon.
Right. Now, I understand that coming to UBC, or the decision to come to UBC, the process of coming to UBC was sort of a combination of the Comedy of Errors and Hamlet. Do you want to just explain what went on there?
Well, okay. Yeah, you and I talked about this, didn't we? The story of my coming to UBC is a long one, and I'll try and just cut it to the bone. Suffice to say that they offered me a job. The UBC English department offered me a job, but they wanted an answer by such a date. Let's call it January the 15th. And meanwhile, in the first 2 weeks of January, McGill has shown an interest in me. And the guy from McGill phones me up and says, "I'm interested in your candidacy, and would you be able to take the job if we offer it to you?" And I said, "Well, yes." That's a strange question, but he said, "Well, we're trying to make up our minds." This is the Hamlet part.
Yeah, right.
They were looking around for exactly the right fit for their department, and there was obviously some kind of split, because they told me they would tell me by such a day, by the 15th of January. I had to tell UBC yes or no by the 15th of January. I had 3 hours time change difference, which helped. And I was sitting in my room waiting for the decision from McGill, because if I'd actually gotten the job at McGill, I would have taken it. Not because I think of McGill as a superior place, but because I was an Easterner through and through, and I'd always was worried about the West, knew nothing about the West, and thought, well, I don't want to go off to the wilderness. I want to stay where I'm comfortable. So I would have taken the McGill job. But at any rate, you can probably tell, the phone rang while I was waiting for the phone call from McGill. But it turned out not to be McGill, not to be UBC demanding a yes or no answer, but the University of California at Davis, wondering whether I was interested in the job or not. I said, "Oh no, I can't do that. I've got enough on my plate. Thank you very much. No, I'm not interested in the job at the University of California at Davis." The phone rang about half an hour later, and the chair of the department at McGill said to me, "We haven't been able to make up our minds. Could you give us a few more days?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. Let me call UBC one more time." And the long-suffering Dr. Robert Jordan, who said, "No, we can't give you any more time. Take it or leave it." At which point I said, "I take it."
Great.
So I ended up at UBC. But the comedy part of it, there was not so much errors, just the comedy part of it. It turned out to be a great place to come. Wonderful friends, wonderful city, and so on and so forth. So I'm glad I did it.
Yes, and we are as well. All right, we're going to move on to the next chapter, which is your time at UBC. So tell us first of all about some of your scholarly work. You've done so much work on Shakespeare, both textual and critical. What are some of the highlights?
Well, I think to talk about this, there's basically sort of three. I guess I'm wedded to the number three, but there's sort of three strands to the work that I've done. One is textual, as you said, and I'll talk about that in a second. One is performative, dealing with performance. And the third is sort of what you might call the literary, for lack of a better word. So let me take these up in order. The textual stuff, I got into kind of by chance by being asked to, again, it's one of those sort of signposts that you mentioned before. I had studied with Gwyn Evans, but I had never dreamed that I would become a textual scholar. But I was asked at a certain point whether I would redo the New Mermaid edition of Tamburlaine, Shakespeare's contemporary Marlowe's brilliant play about a tyrant. And The job was simply to write a new introduction and change some of the annotations. So it was a sort of minor thing to do. And I said yes, but I noticed that there was a lot of faulty textual work in this. And so I went and started going back to the text more fully. And out of that, got interested in textual study, because there's a whole sort of debate about the texts, so what constitutes Shakespeare's text and so on, that I unwittingly entered into. So let me give you a couple of people sometimes want to know what is an editor, like I say, I've edited Hamlet, which I have. What does that actually mean? And one of the things it means is establishing some idea of the text. But what is the text? In the case of something like Hamlet, there are, first of all, we should say of Shakespeare that there are no handwritten manuscripts of Shakespeare's, except for a couple of pages of a play called the Book of Sir Thomas More, which I'll leave to the side. Basically, there's no original text. There are printed texts, and the printed texts vary a lot, one from the other. So you've got to sort of work with that particular kind of discrepancy when you're trying to establish a text. So let me give you a really simple example. And Hamlet again. I'll stick with Hamlet for my examples because it's a well-known play and everybody knows it. It's difficult to make up one's mind about it, but nevertheless, it's a good play. Oh no, sorry, bad joke. The where was I? The example that I'll be taking is a very simple one. You remember the line when after the ghost appears and Horatio says to Hamlet, "This is very strange," and Hamlet responds back to him, "There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy." The thing is that particular line is a line taken from the quarto, the second quarto, which is the text, the single volume text that is probably the closest to Shakespeare's handwriting. In the folio text, the line reads, "There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, that are dreamt of in our philosophy." So the difference between your and our in that particular little line, just one line, can make a huge difference in the conception of Hamlet the character. Is Hamlet wanting to sort of be with his friend Horatio and we're all puzzled by the mysteries of the universe? Or my understanding is better than yours, Horatio. You're just a sort of beginner in this, and there's sort of an element of arrogance, you might say, in the your philosophy line, and an element of acceptance of brotherhood in the second one. So I prefer the second one myself. But if you're going,
you prefer the second one because you think it's more.
Because I like the Hamlet who's a little bit.
Or you like that Hamlet
no, it's not accurate. No, accurate brings up a whole other can of worms. Because for a while, I don't want to get too involved in this, but for a while, scholars thought that what they wanted to do was establish the most accurate text, the one that was most closest to Shakespeare's intention. How do you read back from what you have in the way of scripts to that intention? And after a while, people began to find it suspicious that there was a claim that this is closer to Shakespeare's intention than this, and that this text is superior to that. Instead of that kind of thinking, the thinking began to be all texts are equal, sort of like, all texts are equal. There's no better text, there's no good text. Each one has to be approached on its own merits. And modern text should reflect one, but only one of the early texts. So for example, if you're doing Hamlet again, you should base your text on the second quarto, or you should base it on the folio.
And there must be huge controversies in the
Yeah,
Shakespeare community around these things. Battle
indeed.
Royale.
Yeah, that's right. Lots of it. Good fun though.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I was wanting to do in turning to textual work was include performance in the analysis of text. Again, I'll give you an example from Hamlet that shows the difficulties of sorting out what should be done on stage during a particular sequence when we have certain kinds of evidence in these early texts. And this is the point when Hamlet is in the graveyard and he witnesses the burial of Ophelia, and Ophelia is in the grave, and her brother Laertes comes and he says over her body, "Let me once more embrace you before I say farewell." And he jumps into the grave. He leaps into the grave, and that particular stage direction. He leaps into the grave. At which point Hamlet comes forward and says, "Who is it that's making so much noise around here? Who is this guy? I'm twice the lover of your sister than you are, so I'm the one that should be able to say farewell to her in the most proper way." Thing is that in one of the early texts, at that point it says Hamlet leaps into the grave. However, the early text in which that actually occurs is the weakest and most edited of the most sort of cut version of Shakespeare's of Hamlet. It's called the First Quarto, and it is unreliable in all kinds of ways. But is it possible that this particular stage direction, Hamlet jumps into the grave, which is in the First Quarto, but not in either of the other two texts, which are the better texts?
Well, it's more dramatic.
Sorry?
It's more dramatic in any case.
Well, certainly, and it seems to be what was done in the theater, because there's also a poem, an anonymous poem in memory of the most famous actor of the time, Shakespeare's friend, Richard Burbage, in which it says, "How often have I seen him play the lover and leapt into a grave?" This is a sort of a paraphrase of the line from the poem. So it seems that there's evidence to suggest that on the Elizabethan stage, Hamlet leapt into the grave to a front of Laertes. Otherwise, Laertes has to crawl out of the grave, and then they have to confront each other outside the grave. So once again, when you're putting together a text, you have to decide whether you're going to have this particular stage direction in there or not, and that will affect the way actors play the part in the modern world as well as in the older part.
Well, it sounds like fun.
So it's actually going to be quite a lot of fun. I mean, there's a lot of drudgery in text because you're working on punctuation and spelling and all those kinds of things. But there's also really interesting stuff, and you have to write a commentary, you have to write an introduction. So it's a very thorough getting to know a particular play. And I've done 4 of these, and that'll probably be the end.
Tell us a little about your experience as president of the Shakespeare Association of America.
Oh, yeah. Well, being president of the Shakespeare Association is more of an honor than anything else. But there are some jobs that are attached to it. One of them is to write a letter to the membership, and it's just saying something interesting about what you think about Shakespeare study at the present time. It has so happened, however, that I was elected president of the association in 2001. So right after the crisis on 9/11, I was the president of the association. It was time for me to write my letter in the bulletin. So instead of just throwing out the usual stuff about how great it is to study Shakespeare and how we welcome everybody and all that, I actually wrote a fairly serious little piece about Troilus and Cressida, and which is the play that I was at that point working on, and its rendition of certain crises, particularly the death of Hector. So I wrote a fairly serious piece about it. It was a nice thing to do, and I got a lot of good comments on it. The other thing that the president has to do is to give a speech. This is the terrifying moment, even more terrifying than being on a Zoom interview call, because you have to give a speech to the assembled diners. It's done at a big luncheon, and the speech has to be humorous. It has to be light, but it also has to say something. And so this is, whenever anyone is elected to be president of the Shakespeare Association, the first thing they worry about is, what am I going to say a year hence? They have to actually make
No pressure.
No pressure. Well, also, you got a year to think about it, but hey, it doesn't always work that way. So those are the two things that you do there. But it's I was lucky in a way that I had the chance to write the serious piece in response to 9/11. Which takes me to another point that I'd like to talk about briefly, and that is that one of the things I've wanted to do with my work throughout my career is to speak not only to the inner circle, as you said before, sometimes the textual scholars are the inner circle and so on, but you are at the same time bringing out a text that you want to be used in the modern classroom. The other thing is, I've been talking about performance. I've written a lot about the history of performance. And I wrote a book called the Watching Shakespeare, a Playgoer's Guide, which is directly for people who are interested in theater, but who are not professionals. So I've always had that kind of interest.
Do you consider that, one of the most important components of your legacy?
Well, it's hard to think about one's legacy. Yes, and I think it is in a way, because I put a lot of energy into thinking about the ways in which I've spoken to the people at large. I don't know how many people have taken me up on my invitation to conversation, but I think some. And certainly the editions help this, because the editions are going to be used by scholars, but they're also going to be used by ordinary people who want to read Shakespeare. They're also going to be used by students and so on.
All right. Last part of our talk here, Tony.
Is this about teaching?
Huh?
I wanted to say something about teaching.
Well, I was going to ask you to talk about your teaching. I know you want to talk about your teaching, but I'm also going to ask you about your post-retirement. We have about 6 or 7 minutes.
Oh, good. We've got tons of time. 6 minutes. Post-retirement.
Do you want to talk about your teaching?
Yeah, I think I would, because all the scholarship, the way it works, is connected to your teaching and vice versa, it seems to me. And since my scholarship on the issue of performance, the questions of performance, is been one of the most important parts of my work, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about what I do in class with Shakespeare, what I did in class with Shakespeare. Let me just take a little glass of water here. The thing that I did most, was the most innovative, and which scared the heck out of the students, was in my Shakespeare course, I divided a group, say 40, into 6 groups of 7 or 8, and made them responsible for a play, to produce a full version of the play, cut down to 45 minutes so that they could do it in class. And so the job was for them to A, cut the play to a reasonable size, B, memorize the parts, C, produce the production in class for your classmates. Now, as I said, the students were terrified by this, and they thought, oh no, I don't think I can do this. And so, but at the end, that was always the thing they liked the best.
Right.
And I'll give you an example of something, how meaningful this can be. There was a group that was doing Othello, and they approached the final scene, that horrible final scene, where Othello kills his faithful wife, Desdemona. They set up the classroom so that they had this bed in the middle of the room, which was the teacher's desk that they had taken down off the dais and put in the middle of the room. And they built up this sort of canopy And they put gauzy curtains around the canopy, and Desdemona's in her bed. And Othello comes in. And Othello is approaching the bed with murderous intent. And out of that moment, out of the gauze curtains comes this hand. Will you come to bed, my lord, she says. That may not be the exact line, but please come to bed. What an invitation. But he does come to her bed, but he doesn't come for the purpose that she wants him to come. And this moment when the hand came out of the curtain, it sort of solidified for me the whole enterprise. And it emphasized the importance of gesture, of the physical body and its relationship to the audience. And in particular case, the hand, the beauty of the hand. And that hand has been talked about earlier on, and Othello has grabbed her hand and said, "This hand is hot and moist," and she says, "It's the hand that gave away my heart." And then that same hand comes out of the gauzy curtain. It just blew me away. I just was completely.
That's fantastic.
And I asked the students later. I said, "This was wonderful. Did you, by any chance, plan this to connect with these lines earlier on about her giving away her heart with her own hand, the very hand?" And they said yes. So they had learned to do this, you know. So that got to me both the sort of, in a way, it catches both the performative and the literary side of Othello, because the literary would stress the poetry and the relationship to the images of the hearts and hands, which runs throughout, and having it performed. So
that sounds like a great moment.
I wanted to give that a little discussion because it was a lovely moment for me.
That's great. Tell us just a little bit about your post-retirement life, your post-retirement plans. I understand there might be you might be circling back in a way to your Jesuit past.
Yeah, I have indeed. I started working quite a while ago on the Jesuit Relations, which were books that were written by the Jesuits who came to North America in the early part of the 17th century to convert the native peoples. And unlike many of the colonists, they didn't come with murderous intention. They came with the best of intentions, not always, of course, the best of accomplishments. But the stuff that they wrote back was fascinating. And I was interested in the fact that they were writing about the same time and working at the same time as Shakespeare's theater. And I thought, well, is there any connection between these two totally disparate things? I did write a paper, which I presented at a conference, which was put together by a couple of people that I'm looking at here. I'm getting distracted looking at your pictures, Gretchen, and passing. But I gave a paper on what I took to be some relationships between the Jesuit relations as they were compiled by the Jesuit fathers when they wrote back to France, and Shakespeare's plays, in particular Comedy of Errors, and back to that play. And there's a wonderful sequence in that play where they are shipwrecked, and the character is telling the story about how he escaped by holding on to a mast, and at one end of the mast was him and one of his sons and one of their sons' twins. I mean, the twin of the servant twin. It doesn't. If I start telling you the story, it's going to get too complex. So let me stop that and say there were just some interesting relationships between these two things around the issue of shipwreck and finding oneself back home and coming back and bringing back together the family that is split. So I just want to emphasize the importance of family in this, and the way in which the Jesuit fathers came and established their own sort of non-familial family, if I can put it that way. So I've been doing a bit of work on this, and I would like to publish it sometimes, but whether I will or not, I don't know. I'll tell you, the latest thing that I'm doing is trying to write a memoir of my own time in the novitiate, and looking into what the Jesuits did in Canada.
Fascinating.
It's a tall order, but that's what I'm
It
trying
is
to
a
do.
tall order. But if anyone is up to it, you are, Tony.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. That was fascinating, and I'm sure that there's a whole lot more.